And finally, rule number 4, which is sort of a cheat because there's actually 2 parts. So I suppose you could say rule number 4 and 5, but they are related. The first part is about lists. When to use a comma in sequence. You should always use a comma after each item in a list, including before the last item. So, on the table sat a plate, a cup, and a glass. This is the last comma, this is the comma before the last item in the list. And there's always been a little contention about, well, you don't need to use that because it's the last item, so of course it's clear. And the problem is sometimes it's clear, but sometimes it's not. And if you use the comma, you're always indicating to your reader that item is the last item to the list, and it's never wrong. Whereas if you don't use it, you might cause confusion or it could be wrong. So why risk it, right? So here's a way of looking at it. Here's a couple of sentences. Billy dated Sally, Anne, Marie, Mary, and June, right? Billy dated Sally, Anne, Mary, and June, right? Billy dated Sally, Anne, Mary, and June. Billy dated Sally, Anne, Marie is really what I wanted to do. And June. How many girls did Billy date? And you can see in this one, clearly, Billy dated 4 girls. Well done, Billy. In this one, without by not using some commas, all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe he dated 3 girls, and one of them was named Sally Ann. There. And this last one, he's only dating 2 girls because one of the girls' names is Sally Ann Marie, which is a bit of a long name. But nonetheless, you can see how where you're putting the commas in here really does make a difference. Often this can cause trouble too if your list is in the middle of a sentence, so your reader doesn't know whether the and is moving on to the second part of the sentence or if the and is part of the list. So, rule of thumb, use a comma after each item in a list, including the last one, or including before the conjunction and. Okay, so that's rule number 4, part A. Rule number 4, part B. So we'll call this 4A. And we'll call this 4B. Is about when you use 2 adjectives in a row to describe something. So for instance, big blue barn, or 3 hungry kittens, or fat bald man, right? So in each of these examples, we have 2 adjectives describing a noun, right? And the question is, when do I put a comma between them, and when do I not? If, you're starting to catch on here that it's all if this, then that. If the adjectives equally describe the noun, then put a comma between them. If the adjectives do not equally describe the noun, then leave it alone. Another test here to do. There's a way to test this. So to test if they equally describe the noun, you can either reverse them So go from big blue to blue big. Or can you put the word and between them? Right? So if you reverse them, and you can put the word and between them, and it still makes sense, then they equally describe the noun, and therefore you use a comma. Right? So that's the test for this. This is the question. If the adjectives equally describe the noun, then put the comma between them. But then you ask yourself, well, how do I know if they equally describe the noun? And so you do this test. Reverse them. So in our first example, big blue barn, would you ever say blue big barn? No. Right? You just wouldn't say it. Don't try to convince yourself. Because what will happen with these sometimes is you start to say, well, I might say it. No, you really wouldn't. You wouldn't say, wow, look at that. That is a blue big barn. You just wouldn't. Even if that it's blue is what's significant. You'd be talking about how big the barn is and that it is blue that makes it look funny, right? That is a big blue barn. You're just never going to say, that is a blue big barn. You're just not going to. Similarly, would you ever say, that is a big and blue barn? No. Sounds awkward, right? So you leave it alone. No comma. Again, here, would you say, that is a box of hungry 3 kittens? No, that's weird. Nor would you say, in that box are 3 and hungry kittens. No. So you leave it alone. But if you look at our last one here, would you ever say, could you say, that is a bald fat man? Yeah, I'd say that. He's fat bald man, he's a bald fat man. He's neither more fat than he is bald, nor is he more bald than he is fat. They go together, right? And so similarly, would you say that is a fat and bald, oops, that doesn't need to be capitalized, bald man? Yes. In which case, you go back up here and you put a comma in. So that's the test. If the adjectives equally describe the noun, then put a comma between them. And you can tell if they equally describe if you can reverse them and it still makes sense, and if you can put the word and between them and it still makes sense. If they still make sense, then they equally describe the noun, and therefore you use a comma. If the adjectives do not equally describe the noun, then leave them alone. And that's it for rule number 4b. So 4a is just use a comma before after each item in a list, including before the conjunction. And 4b is use a comma between 2 adjectives when they equally describe the noun. Okay?